So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the Hospitality Resilience series. It is now over 1 year since we initiated this program. Thank you for being part of our ever-expanding community focused on well-being. I could regale you with lots of stats on the importance of mental health, avoidance of burnout, yet our focus has always been on how we can do things better. We don't propose that we know the answers, and when I say we, I talk about my co-hosts Chris Mumford and John Hazan. So we brought together the experts who do know how. This way we can focus on how we can become better leaders, individuals, teams, organizations, and companies. I am your co-host, Jonathan Humphreys from HOCASO and GLION Institute of Higher Education in Switzerland, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to my co-host, John Hazan from Atlas Coaching, who will introduce the last session from our first series. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, an absolute huge welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the grand finale of the first Hospitality Resilience series. We thought a fitting way to end the series would be to invite our illustrious speakers to return and give us their thoughts, experiences, and reactions to the learnings from our 2021 Resilience Indicators and Index survey. In addition, perhaps in a moment of unbridled optimism, we also wanted to discuss with our speakers how we might begin to turn the resilience conversation from surviving to thriving. We are lucky and delighted to be joined today by so many of our past speakers from various points in the globe and various different time zones. Thank you so much for joining us. Chris will introduce them all in just a moment. No doubt to have so many speakers and so many hosts, I should say, could be interesting. We've no desire to overstructure the session, so we're going to let the conversation flow and see what happens. But we are delighted and lucky to have you all with us. Just a few points of admin. Our first thanks to you, the audience, for joining us. Wonderful. Thank you to see so many of you here today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the session. Please do use the chat function, which we will monitor as hosts, and then pose your questions to the speakers. Please note that today's 60-minute session is being recorded and will appear in full, as well as a podcast and an article on the HRS website shortly after the session. Following the initial 60-minute session, there is also a 30-minute Q&A session. It's a chance for you, the audience, to be invited to join us on the panel and ask questions or share experiences with our speakers. Please note that is unrecorded, so please do stay on afterwards if you'd like to. Without further ado, I will hand you over to co-host Chris Mumford to introduce our speakers of the day.
Thank you, co-host John Hazan. I love this co-host label. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here to see you. Thanks for joining, as John says. Delighted to welcome back some of our previous guests from the Hospitality Resilience series. Allow me to do some quick introductions. I don't want to take up too much of our time, but we're really honored to be joined by such illustrious experts in their field. So let's just take a moment to tell you who they are. First, I'm going to go in alphabetical order, so don't let anyone get offended. Chris Bodman. Chris is the founder of Elementary Performance. Chris has devoted his career to the world of sport as a performance psychologist, working at both the team and the individual level with leading athletes and organisational bodies such as England Cricket, Gloucester Rugby, and the British Olympic Association, and did a great session with us on the learnings from the world of sports psychology. So thanks, Chris, for being here. Claudia Roth, former hotel executive who used to run EMEA for leading hotels of the world and had a prestigious career within the hospitality sector. Today, Claudia, you're the founder of Soul Luxury and a respected quantum energy coach, guiding people through areas of personal transformation. So great to see you. Thanks for being here. Patrick Gilmetti, another hotelier with a long outstanding career with Four Seasons in both operations and human resources. And has leveraged all of that incredible experience and expertise in his current work as a leadership trainer and executive coach and facilitator of dynamic transformational leadership programs, which he's about to do in 54 minutes apparently after this. Right, about to go into another one. So thanks, Patrick, for making the time. Pekka Poyakalio from Hintsa brings a wealth of experience in executive leadership, and is an executive mentor and business development director at HINSA. For those who don't know, HINSA is a leading high-performance coaching organization, best known for its work in Formula One, working with both F1 teams and drivers and taking the learnings from that world into the business context. Richie Curry, Richie we're going to hear from a bit more in a second, but Richie's a member of the faculty of the School of Hospitality Administration at Boston University. Richie majored in psychology and then went on to focus his attentions through his master's and PhD in industrial and organizational psychology at University of Central Florida. And it's through his work with colleagues at UCF that we've together conducted the hospitality resilience study, which we conducted in kind of late spring, early summer of this year. We'll hear a bit more about that in a moment. And then finally, we have Yadid Eisenberg, who, Yadid, if I'm right in saying, until very recently, you were at Bose as global head of sleep devices and a director role, and you oversaw sleep products, and then specifically, when we heard on your session, the launch of the Sleep Bud product. And according to your bio, you're now working on your next big thing. So I can't wait to see and hear what that's going to be. So welcome everybody. Let's get going. Richie, if I may, I'll turn to you to kick us off with a quick summary of the findings of the resilience study that I just mentioned, and that can hopefully then lead us into conversations and questions on that. So over to you.
Absolutely. Can you all see my screen here? Wonderful. So, I'll make introductions quick. We're all here because we're interested in resilience. We're all here because we're interested in leadership. We're all here because we're interested in the hospitality industry. And so there really has been a great push towards studying and paying closer attention to the role resilience plays in organizations more broadly, even outside of the hospitality industry. In the context of COVID-19, besides the healthcare industry, I really can't think of another industry perhaps more negatively impacted by COVID-19. And so the purpose of this study was really to further our understanding of the role that resilience plays in hospitality organizations in the context of COVID-19, but really freeform to just really understand how resilience impacts organizations in the hospitality industry. And given the huge top-down influence that business executives and other high-ranking leadership leaders in these organizations have on organizations and their employees more broadly, the focus of our initial research effort really was on those in high-level leadership positions in the hospitality industry and how resilience operates for those individuals. So as Chris just described, I was working alongside two other researchers from the University of Central Florida to develop, administer, and analyze the results of a survey on resilience among leaders in the hospitality industry, obviously alongside Chris, Jonathan, and John. Because of kind of this growing interest in resilience, in the recent, I would say over the past 5 years, it's really kind of taken off. The researchers have used a number of different measures and tools to capture, hone in on what resilience is and how resilient individuals are. And with that, there isn't really one go-to measure or metric of resilience. And so what we did was take a close look at these different tools and measures to identify what elements of resilience are commonly identified in these different indices. And instead of measuring resilience directly, what we did was construct a resilience index that was really comprised of 3 of the most critical elements that are most commonly measured when measuring resilience. And these elements include subjective well-being, which is really individuals' perception of their overall health, mental, physical, and so on. Coping self-efficacy is individuals' self-confidence in their ability to handle challenging stressors in life in an effective manner. And organizational member adaptivity, this is where it's kind of specific to just a work environment. So this is organizational member, that's an employee, so their ability to adapt to stressors or challenges unique to a work environment in a proactive and an effective way. And so together, these 3 key resilience indicators form our resilience index. Research finds, not surprisingly, that individuals who who are more resilient or who have higher levels of resilience, they tend to report having fewer negative impacts from critical life stressors or critical life events relative to less resilient individuals, right? And along similar lines, resilient individuals are better equipped at using social resources such as relationships with others, or contextual resources such as involvement in their community, spirituality, so on and so forth, to assist them in coping with whatever stressors that they experience, whether in work or in non-work contexts. So what we did was we took a look at 12 life domains. That's how I'll refer to these items that you see on the screen. These items include relationships with individuals, whether family, friends, people at work, involvement in work, involvement in your community, health, and so on. And we really wanted to address two overarching questions. The first being, do resilient leaders report these life domains as being more or less negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic? And also we sought to address the second question, which was, do more resilient leaders find these same life domains that could be negatively impacted by COVID, but do they view these same life domains as enabling them to effectively handle the strain caused by COVID to a greater or lesser degree than those who report lower levels of resilience? And so with the help of Chris, John, and Jonathan, we recruited a sample of 156 leaders in the hospitality industry. I do want to take just a moment to highlight how impressive the sample really was. Their average age was 49 years old. They worked on average 16 years in the current organization that they were working for at the time of completing the survey. They had 24 years on average experience in the hospitality industry. They reported an average of 533 employees under their kind of responsibility, and reported $50.2 million as the average revenue in US dollars under their direct responsibility. With regard to the sectors within the hospitality industry that were represented, most were in the lodging sector, as you can see, but other sectors such as food and beverage, events and meetings, consultancy or advisory positions, many others were represented here as well. So turning now to the results of the study, the domains that were most negatively impacted by COVID included engagement in leisure activities, mental and psychological health, friendships with others outside of work, as well as work involvement, which I think many of us on the call today understand why COVID-19 perhaps had the most negative impacts on these life domains in particular. However, our findings did indicate that our less resilient leaders, or the leaders who scored lower on the 3 key resilience indicators forming our resilience index, they reported many of these life domains as being significantly more negatively impacted by COVID than our more resilient leaders. And then not surprisingly, the life domains that were most often viewed as resources enabling our sample of leaders to cope with stressors or challenges brought on by the pandemic. These life domains included relationships with significant others, spirituality or religion, physical health and mental health. And so it's interesting to see that some of these life domains that were negatively impacted or perceived to be heavily negatively impacted by COVID were also perceived to be viewed as resources enabling people to cope with COVID-19. And along similar lines, our research also indicated that those individuals, or the leaders in our sample that scored higher on our resilience index, they reported that these critical life domains, again, many of which were rated as being negatively impacted by COVID, that they could also be considered resources enabling them to cope with challenges brought on by the pandemic to a greater degree than our less resilient participants. And so going forward, here we kind of took a look at what does resilience look like in a sample of very high level leaders in the hospitality organization. We don't really want to stop there. We're really interested in how these leaders can encourage resilience among employees within their organizations and promote or motivate their organizations to become resilient organizations, if you will. And then what is the impact of resilience on enterprise level health as well as performance outcomes? It's really where we want to take this moving forward. Nonetheless, our initial research effort really highlighted the importance of resilience across disparate life domains. And by that, I mean, as I mentioned just previously, work involvement, access to training and developmental opportunities had a spillover effect to other non-work life domains, if you will. So work really has a far-reaching impact, which supports the notion of the centrality that work plays on our social and our personal identities. Our research also highlights the importance of social support. And this support is important whether it comes from family, whether it comes from friends outside of work, as well as the bonds that we form in the workplace. And last, but certainly not least, physical and psychological health often take on quite a bit of damage when dealing with critical life events or life stressors, especially when thinking about COVID-19. However, in these challenging times, our health is really a vital lifeline that we can draw from when coping with these challenges that we're experiencing. So with that, I really welcome any questions you may have, toward the end of our panel discussion here. But I do want to just communicate how honored I and my co-researchers were in having the opportunity here. And I really look forward to hearing from the rest of the panel to move this forward, not just talking about how to cultivate resilience, but really how to thrive in these challenging times that we're all living through right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richie. Wonderful summary and very insightful findings from the survey. As you said, the focus now is on how we can utilize this great information in terms of how we can thrive moving forward. And what I would like to do is, obviously, we've got many different life domains there. And each of the panelists and the experts that we have here have different aspects and nuances and experiences of resources, either directly themselves or through the people and teams and leaders that they've helped in the respective areas. So I would just like to open it up to our experts to ask them, how do they see the opportunity now in terms of those particular life domains? How does it relate to their particular area? And how is it possible that we can move this forward in order to help us become better and thrive in this environment rather than just make do? So I'm gonna happily ask any of you to kind of jump in on this one. Who feels bold enough to start? Patrick, wonderful. Thank you very much, Patrick.
So here, what resonates with me, Chris Mumford gave me way too much credit on being an expert in that field. I'm not, but I have an experience. And what I learned throughout this whole pandemic is that, to me, resilience is a choice. And why is that? Why does this ring true for me? Because I noticed that I was not resilient the first 2 months in. I went to a pretty dark place because all of those life components that Richard mentioned so successfully, some of them were either taken away from me, at least that's how it felt, or they fell away from me. And I went to a pretty dark place and I was in resistance. And at some point I noticed that, hey, I'm a leadership facilitator in the domain of transformational work, not okay to stay in that dark place. And at that moment, I made a choice to shift out of resistance into acceptance, meaning, okay, it is just so. I'm obviously resistant to, something that's going on here that's profound. And in that moment, something shifted. So I shifted from this place out of resistance into acceptance. And when I did that, my resilience started to take off in a new direction. So I think the provocation that I want to offer this morning, to me, resilience is a choice. That's a
wonderful. Thank you very much. Patrick, I think it's I think it's extremely relevant, this whole resistance versus acceptance. Pekka, you have your hand up here. I'm going to bring you in.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Patrick. And building on what you say, I'm fully agreeing with, and I remember also prior to COVID, I was very allergic to this kind of a thinking that, hey, you can choose your attitude, your mindset. But when you start to look at it, it's when we are not talking about the situation where you have clinical mental issues, where actually choices in your hands. I quote a couple of persons, one extremely unknown to all of you, because his publishing has been in Finnish, and I doubt that many of you are fluent yet in our language. But my friend wrote a book which title was "Everything is Fine Regardless of How Everything Is," which I think it was a little bit of the mindset that Patrick is reflecting to, that, hey, we have only this moment. We didn't choose COVID, but we can choose to live every day. And then if we want to go a little bit of more well-known reference, then is one of my big inspirations is the work of Professor Viktor Frankl, who wrote this book of Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about this, how he survived the horrors of concentration camps with this thought that even there, you could choose your mindset. Is it easy? No, but it's also that, the way that we discuss is contagious. And I leave with the one funny research quote. In Sweden, they studied the contagiousness of stress and basically attitude. And they saw that even the pets, cats and dogs, started to behave differently when the owner was stressed. So as Patrick said, we are responsible of the example and mindset that we are sharing with others.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Pekka. I would like to introduce Chris. Thank you very much. And Pekka, you've made some great references there. Viktor Frankl's, all around. Also, when we have a purpose, the ability for us to be able to cope with any given situation is much easier. So, Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I guess on both of those reflections, I think it's really important. I spoke a little bit about it when I spoke with you before, but just understanding what the definition of resilience is, first of all. And even as I mentioned previously, the language that we use around resilience or resilient. So again, my understanding of resilience is it's a dynamic construct, and you're somewhere on that continuum at any given time, and in certain contexts, then that will change where you are. So situations that we've all experienced of late have put us in, have put us in places that we wouldn't have been in before. And so I think it's really important to understand we're somewhere on that, as opposed to being resilient or not resilient. And just having that mindset then makes it proactive, and echoing then Patrick's point in terms of then that gives us a choice to be able to navigate ourselves there once we understand what, again, kind of personal qualities and other things are important to that. That was all I wanted to say on that.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think this whole dynamic thinking is really important, and it puts us under less pressure that way as well as individuals. Yadid.
Something that Patrick said resonated in the fact that a lot of it is choice, and one of the things we have control over is routine and schedule. And so during the pandemic, many of us actually had less constraints, right? Because now I don't have to be in the office at 8 a.m., which potentially means that if my first meeting is at 10:30, I could sleep in until 10. I could, and the same for the end of the day. There is no really end of day. It depends on when my last meeting is, et cetera, et cetera. And what that caused is that for many people, because now their routine changed and it impacted their sleep cycles, they couldn't fall asleep at night, they woke up much, much later, circadian cycle is impacted, that can worsen into insomnia. and really the choice is now I maintain a regular schedule. I wake up at the regular time, no matter if I have a meeting at 8 a.m. or I don't. I shut down the computer at 5 p.m. or 5:30, no matter what, and I go to bed at a regular time. That consistency and routine is extremely important, and you know, it's physiology, it's mental, and so that I think that is a choice, and it looks like a very, very small thing, but it's actually very it's critical. And by doing that, now you've actually increased your resilience by making that mindful choice.
Yeah, thanks indeed. I just wanted to jump in for a second on this mindset, which is essentially what we're discussing, is attitude and mindset. And I found it fascinating, Richie, that I really had to reflect on this primary result that resilient people are more resilient, if you see what I mean. Resilience breeds resilience. And at first I thought, well, that sounds criminally obvious. You know, if you're surely resilience is more resilient, but it bears out a lot of what we're talking about is that, you know, for years, maybe as a hapless optimist, I've believed that good things happen to good people, and that mindset allows you to project. To Pekka's point, even your pets will become more positive if you're a positive person. And I've seen it in my experience through my various different work, as I'm sure you have, that positive people are often better leaders, are more embraced into a community. They're just a more natural fit. And I find it fascinating that in some ways, this research that's now been studied shows that actually, if you do focus on positive mindset, if you do focus on your resilience, and as all of you have said today, you know, you have to make a conscious effort to move yourself towards that. But if you can move yourself towards that, good things will happen. You are better placed to deal with adversity, and you are in many different ways more able to cope with what things can throw at you. I find it fascinating that now we have empirical evidence, courtesy of Richie and his plan, to back this up. Am I being overly optimistic here in stating the obvious?
I'll just jump in real quick. Absolutely not. You're not being overly optimistic. You're spot on. You know, actually, it's just earlier this year, in August of this year, a prominent journal, Group and Organization Management, published a special issue on resilience in organizations. I mean, that's just how important it's been, that's how it's become over the past few years, and certainly during COVID. Of course, given my interest in resilience in organizations, I read a few of the articles in that special issue, and one of them really was a review article on what's going on among resilience researchers, and they really said resilience can be thought of in three ways. It has been studied in three ways. People think of it, in terms of resilience being a trait. You're either resilient or you're not. It's something you're kind of born with, or we're not born with. Resilience as a skill, something that you can train or kind of develop people to become more resilient. And then also resilience as an outcome. So resilience as kind of the behavior or the results of certain actions or adaptive performance, right? I'm certainly a believer in resilience as a skill. I think it's something that can be developed. I don't think you're born with it or without it, and you never can acquire it over time, right? I guess that's kind of the nurture part of me, being, a psychologist by training. But with that, if you really think back to our resilience index, the organization member adaptability is really more of the choice element. You're adaptive or you're not. You have this capacity or you don't, right? And if you have it, then choose to use that. But there are so many other contextual factors that promote resilience. So if you think about our subjective well-being, well, what factors go into us perceiving that we're well, right? That we're healthy, that we're whole, as well as our coping self-efficacy, our belief that we're able to cope with these challenging stressors. Sure, that's a choice that we can cope with it, but our perception, our confidence in our ability to cope is somewhat contingent on past experiences, on things we hear from other people, on things we see in the media. So there's certain aspects that I don't want to say are outside of our control, but that influence our resilience capacity as a whole. And then, that resilience capacity could be higher or lower. And yes, if we choose to turn it on, it can be more or less effective depending on how much of that ability or how much of that capacity we've actually acquired over time. And so I'm a firm believer in resilience as a skill, something that we can develop and something that we choose to turn on. But there's so many other factors that kind of contribute to how well do we actually how well have we mastered this skill, right?
Yeah, I think that leads Rich into something that's going through my mind, which is around the context of resilience and the environment. So, you know, Patrick, your example, you know, do you need a certain environment around you to be able to allow you to make that choice, right? And then thinking at it from an organizational standpoint, and what environment do you need to create for your people to be able to foster this resilience? And it seems, Richie, from the study that, you know, things like relationships with others that are close to you is pretty important. The access to leisure is pretty important, and these aspects of it. So I just wonder if the panel can weigh in on, you know, how much a role does that play, you know, in terms of your environment, and what can then, I guess, thinking at it from an organizational standpoint, how can you encourage that environment to allow that?
Chris, may I jump in? I'm not addressing your question. I want to bring another aspect into the conversation before going into kind of solutions, because everything what was talked very much resonates with me. But there's one other very important aspect which we haven't discussed, and which I believe goes hand in hand with resilience, which is vulnerability. Because, you know, as Patrick was saying, to shift from resilience to acceptance, there is this place of the darkness, of that place where we are very vulnerable, because our reality as we know it has been, in the context of COVID, taken away. So we are actually go through a phase of vulnerability, and how well are we equipped to accept that before we can see and before we can move into the space of acceptance. And especially in business, vulnerability, I don't know as an answer, is not, you know, common language. Is in business we are trained to, especially as leaders, we have to have answers, even though that's shifting now as well, because we recognize that, you know, what we know is no longer the path into the future. But the vulnerability in the context of business is also something which I think needs to be, you know, be brought into the conversation to honor that that strength which resilience actually brings about.
Chris, do you want to, I think you wanted to add in? And then Patrick.
Patrick, I don't know if you want to back onto the vulnerability piece that Claudia just talked about.
It's okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Kind of you. Yeah, I just triggered something, Claudia. You're absolutely right. I think that vulnerability component is huge. To me, even the willingness to get to that place of vulnerability has to do with choice as well. I am fortunate and do a lot of leadership work in the corporate domain, specifically in hotels. And authenticity / vulnerability becomes more important than ever. And I experienced a hunger and a thirst of folks wanting to go there, whilst being somewhat scared, whilst clearly knowing that gets us in the uncomfortable. But more and more, there's also a willingness to take a risk to go to that place. And I experience it all the time. And when vulnerability gets into the room, when vulnerability is expressed fully within teams, all of a sudden shifts, not only in terms of team cohesion, but also in terms of, I would say, an increase in the resilience in teams. And then something shifts. I'm so glad you brought this up, Claudia. And Chris, thank you for allowing me to chime in. It really triggered something in me, that vulnerability component. I think that resonates very, very, very fully with me.
I think absolutely, and again, agree with all the interaction of those kind of individual personal qualities, I guess, which we spoke about already. So vulnerability being one, acceptance, choice, all of those things are really important. And then just touching back on Chris's point, how that then interacts with the environment consideration as well. So certainly within the elite sport world, there's been some really good research on what effect the environment does have, and some work from Mustafa Sarkar and David Fletcher specifically around kind of mental fortitude training. Again, I spoke about this when I was on the pod before, but again, really, I think relevant to touch on now is that the relationship between challenge and support. So I kind of presented this matrix where you've got on one axis low to high challenge and on the other low to high support. And when we're talking about this ideal area for people to thrive, in which we're talking about today, they reference it as this facilitative kind of environment where there's a high level of challenge. Absolutely, we need to challenge our people to get the best out of them. But similarly, we align an appropriate level of support. And if those two things are matched, then it would suggest that, like I say, we provide this environment, or the environment provides the people within it to then be able to thrive. If we overdo those things or underdo those things, then we get different outcomes. And again, in sport, there's been a lot of narrative around probably ramping the challenge up a little bit too much, and then being a bit undercooked on the support. And that can become what Sarkar and Fletcher refer to as more of an unrelenting environment, where it's not sustainable, where you're going to get potential burnout, as we've kind of referenced already. And similarly, again, if we bring the challenge down and over support, then it can become either quite a stagnant or a comfortable environment. So it's not to say that we need to spend all of our time in this facilitative environment. At times we might need to be a bit unrelenting, and at times we might need to be a bit comfortable. And I'm not sure there's a lot of times that we want to be stagnant. But having the ability to understand how that works, and it's not just presented in the environment that you're in. And that's where I think it's really important to know the people that you're working with. So it's not just the challenge that environment brings, or that organization brings, but understanding what other challenges that those people are going through to hopefully be able to align those two things together.
Chris, thanks for that summary. I think it's critically important. I'm going to hold my point and comments. Yadid, I'd like to bring you in. You raised your hand first.
Yeah. So specifically to reference Chris on the support part. During COVID, I think many organizations struggled in finding ways to support their employees. And those of us who were lucky enough to have support systems at home, if family, friends, I think those of us who were lucky to have that, it was easier for us to survive or even thrive. Whereas what I've been hearing from others who were not so lucky, that they were feeling isolated, that they really felt that they had no support from anyone. And I think it's a very important point. How do organizations change and adopt to the fact that now we're not necessarily all co-located in the same office, and so the past happy hours or the past employee onboarding when someone joins the organization and now they feel part of the family, that no longer happens. They get their welcome kit at home and they join a bunch of online meetings, and that's it. How do we change that? I think that's still very much a big challenge, and I think it's critical for thriving. And I'd be very happy to hear opinions on how to improve that, because I don't think anyone has managed to crack that yet.
Thank you, Yadid. Yes, definitely. I think a critical topic to discuss, and hopefully we can address this. I'm going to bring Pek in. I'll make a comment and then come back to your question. Hopefully, through the various panelists, we can address that directly. Pekka.
Yeah, Jonathan, you will never get your chance because people start getting excited in discussing.
I'm adapting. It's okay.
Okay, very good, resiliently. But But the building on both on Chris and Yadi, a couple of models that I like particularly. There's one thing which is called demand support model, originally by researchers named Karasek and Theriel, who were basically saying that when the demands of the work are increasing, you can avoid the negative effects of increased demands if you improve the control of individual's job, if you improve the support and relationships at the job, and also you build in accomplishment and meaning. And then, okay, then this is easy to talk theory here. So coming back to Yadid's point that, okay, how do you do that in practice? Well, a couple of just reflections that I like particularly is that one is just an anecdote. There's a senior partner of a leading management consultancy introduced me to a equation, which was E doesn't equal PS, which was empathy doesn't equal problem solving. So just being there for other people is amazing. And that is, you know, what we have discussed with lots of our clients is that, hey, now when there has been a crisis, people's meaning has been shaken, you know, pandemic doesn't concern me was the original, you know, thought. There's more and more of this, you know, traditional leadership work that we need. We need to be available for people. We, like Chris was saying, you know, the support has to be there. It is just the simple things. Like Professor Brené Brown is writing, she has this concept of two-word check-in in every meeting. You start by asking how you're doing in 2 words. And it's not about problem solving. Okay, Pekka, you are tired and frustrated. What should we do about it? It is acknowledging, it is normalizing. And it's about being human. And I think that when there are lots of modern companies which are talking about this self-organizing teams and leadership as a service, I'm an old guy. I just think that everybody needs a good boss and boss who is a human and who is there for you. So just good old, you know, manager-employee relationship and being a human being.
Thank you, Pekka. Okay, I'm going to do a summary in a little bit. We've got 15 minutes left. I just wanted to kind of draw on some of these themes, and you know, there's been a lot of talk around self-care and the importance of self-care, and you know, reflecting on that and just hearing what we're hearing today on the panel, that puts a lot of emphasis on the individual. And it puts a lot of pressure on the individual from the organizations. It's like, hey, we give you time, look after yourself. We'll give you this particular day off, make sure you're okay. But you know, I think what's resonating with me at the moment is that it's absolutely critical that the culture and the environment supports this absolutely throughout from the very top, and they have to believe in it wholeheartedly. And then it creates this sense of community, so you don't get this situation of isolation, which Yadid, you mentioned, and that you're in it by yourself, even if your colleagues haven't figured it out. But this culture, this community is very, very powerful. And I guess drawing these themes together, and I'll summarize them a little bit, but drawing these themes together, one of the things, if we look at what's been discussed, and maybe indirectly, if we look at things like resistance versus acceptance, and we look at the contagiousness of situations, and I'll just give you a very personal kind of quick anecdote. In terms of energy, because I think a lot of this, in order to have some kind of sense of resilience, to be able to cope with the challenges that we're faced, we have to be able to get our energy from somewhere. And Richie, if you kind of look at the outcome of the study, it's kind of, you could argue that those life domains, it's basically about where do people get their energy from? Where can they source that energy, and therefore transfer that energy where maybe they need to be able to transform it to. And it's a very small anecdote, but over the last, I would say, 6 months, I've found it pretty difficult. There's been a lot going on in different situations. And I was just trying to figure out, how I could potentially kind of find a new energy source. And, Chris and John and I have been regularly on these calls. And, I think some of us find it back through the re-engagement of work or different initiatives. Maybe it's a relationship, but I just started cold water swimming last week. on Sunday. A few minutes in the lake, freezing cold temperatures. For some reason, it's completely changed my energy and that sense of community. I started by myself, but every morning there's more and more people that I bump into. We're trading times, how long we're in the water, how long it takes to warm up. And then suddenly there's this camaraderie that I never really expected. And there's this really positive energy that I'm feeling that I'm transferring into other aspects of my life. And it's just been 1 week. So and it's a few minutes a day. And I guess, Claudia, I just wanted to kind of bring you in here because you've been part of this around, quantum energy, the transfer of energy, the contagion of energy. And I just wondered if, we could, maybe explore that a little bit in terms of how we can maybe harness our energy and therefore bring that into, the bigger sense, and also how that ties in with community as well.
Jonathan, first of all, I commend you. I think it's awesome what you do. And it's incredible how other people, pick it up and then suddenly something bigger comes about it. And then, in fact, the same happened to the initiative I created because everything is energy. And our state of being dictates how we're showing up. And in the adversity of, the last 18 months, it is very difficult, and it's very easy and even very normal that we can actually lose that positive sense about life. And I also would like to say, share something. I've been thinking a lot about that, positivity. There's a lot of on social media, we have to be positive, we have to be positive. But actually, if we really think about it, life is not only about being positive, because experiences of sadness, of whatever comes into one's own energy field, it's part of the experience of life. However, what is important is that we are managing our energies and know when we are dwelling too long in potentially negative energy, when we feel ready to embrace another state of being. Because for me, what is very obvious is the last 18 months is giving us all an incredible opportunity and actually an invitation to shift our energies into something more aligned to who we truly are. So I allowed myself to explore different modalities in order to shift my energy. And it has been fantastic because I'm learning and I'm becoming very aware when my energy is changing. And sometimes I just have to sit with it because something wants to come into my awareness and wants to be addressed rather than being pushed down by being positive.
If I may, I would like to reinforce also what Claudia is saying. Sadness is a feeling, and I think we can avoid it or we can be in it. And my experience is very similar like yours, Claudia. When I'm in it, I'll choose to be in it fully. And by choosing to be in it fully, I get to express it. And then at some point, I get to be done with it. And I break through, and then I can embrace a different energy. And I have a fundamental belief, people who experience sadness fully also have the capacity to experience the exact opposite fully. And I think both deserves to be expressed, and they're only feelings, they come and go. So instead of avoiding them, I would advocate jointly with you, be in it fully, have the experience, and then make a choice. You either dwell in it and choose not to come out of it, or you make a different choice at some point and you come out of it and you create a different experience.
Yes.
I just wanted to jump on that. I love the example from Jonathan about cold water swimming and energy, and then Claudia and Patrick pick up on your point about kind of finding out what works for you. I suppose I would say this as a coach, but I'm a great fan of personal solutions and personalization, and there's so much information out there. But what I think we need to draw on, and it plays out to what Richie said as well, is finding out what works for us, finding out our personal solutions, drawing on the information that's available to us, of which there is so much, And if cold water swimming works for us, if personal transformation can be engaged by, certain triggers, if accepting vulnerability is our first step on a journey to self-awareness and self-efficacy, then that is a wonderful thing. But finding out what works for you and making it a personal solution, and almost, Yadid, to your point, is this what, I pose this as a question, is this what industries and organizations need to do? Do they need to look within and say, okay, well, our moving parts are unique to our business. So what does our business need to thrive now? How are we going to do this? What is our solution to the work from home conundrum? What is our management style? And I bow to the likes of Pekka, who have been dealing with these organizations for many years. I think if we generalize a solution, we risk perhaps stepping off down the wrong path. If we look within and we start with a really clear understanding of what we ourselves or our organizations need, then wouldn't that be a wonderful place to start? And I'm sure solutions can follow.
And John, to your point, if I may, I think what is really important is actually to consider potentially a new word for organizations, because what is actually important now is community. We are seeking community where we feel held while we are going through a phase of potential vulnerability, where we learn to be resilient, where we learn to show up in our greatest version. So communities are very important, and I see it myself that when I'm part of a community and I'm being fully heard and understood, I can explore all those emotions. I can feel vulnerable because I can show up in the state of my energy field as it is at that moment in time. So communities are very important in the context of business as well as on a personal front, so that we can, it's almost like I see ourselves and myself as a young child. We like to explore, but we want to be with friends who understand us. So if we fall, we get a little bit pat on the shoulder, or somebody holds their hand and says, come on, let's go on, it's okay. It's that kind of energy which is needed so that we can learn to deal with everything which is coming our way.
Is it okay if I jump in real quick?
That's what I was just about to introduce you, Richie.
I wanted to actually comment on something you had said just a moment ago, Jonathan. You had mentioned, you had kind of reframed the idea of the survey in the sense of, these life domains serving as sources of energy, right? And that's kind of what a resource is. It's a source of energy that we can choose, going back to that idea of resilience as a choice, that we can choose to tap into, or we can choose to just let sit there, right? And waste and wilt away. Thank you, Pekka, for bringing up job demands control model from Karasek. I'm going to throw in one more, and I'm going to try and keep it really, really high level. But Fredrickson's thought action repertoire model, or emotion model, really comes out of the positive psychology space. But really, it's this simple idea that, and very well supported theory, that when people are experiencing positive emotions, their thought action repertoire, their ability to generate effective responses to different situations or events, whether at work or whether not work, their number of ideas, ways that they can effectively, I guess, address these issues is more when you're experiencing positive emotions, right? So your repertoire of opportunities is expanded when you're in a more positive headspace, right? And I think that a similar notion can really be applied here, right? Our more resilient leaders, it's you see all these different life domains, and some of those are taking a hit when you're under challenging situations or experiencing stressors. But more resilient people can look to other areas that perhaps are less negatively impacted and actively choose to draw or tap into those energy sources when other energy sources perhaps may be lacking. And so here you kind of have an expanded energy repertoire, if you will. Really, there's different sources of energy, and our more resilient individuals are better equipped at identifying where those sources of energy are, and knowing which ones are kind of lacking, and kind of reallocating their attention to other areas accordingly. So I think that's a really interesting idea. I really like Fredrickson's theory right there. I think it really ties in well with what's going on and what we saw, given the pattern of results we saw with the study.
Thank you very much, Richie. I'm just conscious of time. It's time for me to wrap up. It's incredible how quickly an hour goes, and we could, I'm sure, carry on for another hour. But we've covered so much, and I would like to give the opportunity to my co-hosts also to say thank you. So just a quick summary. We started off with looking at the findings of the resilience survey, the different life domains, which are essentially resources, opportunities for us to tap into and how we can thrive. We talked about the difference between resistance and acceptance, and how if we move towards acceptance, then it allows us to adapt more easily to the situation. And also kind of reframing things, that everything can be fine or perceived to be fine from our perspective, irrespective of how the situation is. It just depends how we look at it. That obviously things like stress and also well-being are contagious. So ultimately we have a choice. It's not about being resilient. It's about having resilience. It's a dynamic state. That routine is critical, that we keep our routine, we build our routine, and I would add to that, we try and create these micro habits that allow us to keep our circadian cycle, which is critical for our overall well-being, and sleep is a critical part of that. Being vulnerable and being open leads us to an opportunity to be more authentic. It connects, allows us to connect with others. And at the same time, what we can tap into is essentially looking around and being part of a community that takes care of us. It's not about our self-care to start with, that's important, but also the organizations, the teams, the leaders that we're all part of, it has to come from within, it has to come from the top down. They need to build the opportunity for support and the infrastructure that really embraces this. Once again, we can manage our energies through the different areas and through the different life domains we can decide. And I think ultimately, we are saying there is no one-stop solution. It is about customizing our approach, customizing what works for us, tapping into what resonates for us. And ultimately, we can, and this is going back to the very beginning, that's why we have you all around the table here, because everybody has a different perspective. Everybody's able to share from their different areas of expertise. However, what I see is a lot of this coming together. It all resonates in a way which is we have an opportunity to be part of a community to then find solutions which work for us and our organizations. So that's it from my side. I would like to pass over now to Chris Mumford, my co-host, to say a big thank you to all of you.
Yeah, big thank you on behalf of John, Jonathan, myself, and the audience. Chris, Claudia, Patrick, Pekka, Richie, Yadid, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, your willingness, for being so open, and thank you overall for your support of the Hospitality Resilience series. It wouldn't have been the great year it's been and the sessions we've done without your input. So thank you on behalf of us very much. And I must also actually just take a moment to thank those who couldn't join us today, but who did take part in our previous sessions. So Eve Javel from Hyatt, Bruce Harkness from Wyndham, Raya Jordan, our nutrition expert, and Sean Worker on adaptability. So unfortunately, those four wanted to be here but couldn't. Hopefully there'll be another opportunity to hear from them again. John, I think you're going to just wrap up and take us into our next half hour, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And yes, thank you to everyone who joined us. That concludes the first series, the first Hospitality Resilience series. Thank you so much to everyone that attended today and our previous discussions. Please do look out for the recording of this session, as well as the article and the podcast on the HRS website. Our thanks to GLION for their support throughout the series. Thank you. And to the Hokuso production team, Rhea, Leia, Jan Oscar, and Yad for their hard work behind the scenes throughout this long season. Thank you so much. We hope very much that you, the audience, have enjoyed these discussions as much as we have enjoyed them, and we hope you found them interesting, enlightening, but most of all enjoyable. Thank you for attending. Please do look out for the next series in 2022. There'll be notifications as soon as that's up and running, but we do hope you'll join us for that season.